Hello and welcome back. We're now going to hear from Neil Smith, Head of Manufacturing Support Services at the MTC, and a panel of experts where we'll be focusing on transferring and embedding leading-edge manufacturing advances across our existing and future workforces. Neil, over to you.
Thank you, Aaron. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session where we're exploring how we can transfer and embed leading edge manufacturing advances across our existing and future workforces on the theme of skills and training. My name is Neil Smith. I head up the Manufacturing Support Services, which is a customer facing arm of the MTC. My team go out and engage with, in general, SMEs and help them meet their challenges in adopting technology and productivity and also skills. On the panel today, we've got a good representation from industry, from academia, from the Catapults, and from the Advanced Manufacturing Training Centre itself at the MTC. We've got Phil Rohnson from MRT Castings, Tony Moscrop from Do for Light, Dr. Nigel Bannister from the University of Leicester, Alan Anderson from the HVMC, High Value Manufacturing Catapult Centre, David Hughes from the Advanced Manufacturing Training Centre. So the subject says on advanced manufacturing, and I just thought I'd start before I ask the panel to introduce themselves. What are examples of advanced manufacturing? And I've come up with six examples: smart manufacturing, cloud computing, the Internet of Things, nanotechnology, additive manufacturing, and virtual augmented reality. I'm sure there's many more, but they seem to be the mainstream themes. So I'm just going to now go and over to the panel and ask the panel to introduce themselves. So first of all, Phil, can you introduce yourself again, who you are, what you do, and what you, on the title of Transfer and Embedding Leading Edge Manufacturing Advances Across Our Existing and Future Workforces, what your interpretation of that is.
Thanks,
Over to you then, Phil.
Morning, everyone. I'm Phil Rohnson, and I'm the Managing Director of MRT Castings. We're an aluminium die casting foundry and CNC machine shop down in Andover in Hampshire. SME, so currently employing about 95 people. Although that's doubled to that level over the past year because we're heavily involved in ventilator production. So our largest customer produces critical care ventilators, and so we've had to scale our production up more than threefold over the last year. So skills have been very relevant in that, obviously in terms of maintaining the agility of our team to respond to a customer need. So we needed to scale up and we needed to introduce an awful lot of new technology very quickly. So yeah, skills are key to that and a topic very close to my heart. Okay,
thank you. Oh, just a word to the audience. Please ask questions as we go along. It's an interactive session, so we do welcome questions from the audience. Okay, I'm going to ask now Tony to introduce yourself. You're on mute, Tony.
Mute. Is that better?
That's better, yeah.
Sorry about that. Yeah, my name's Tony Moscrop. I'm the Chief Executive of Do for Light Developments, which is an SME based in St Neots in Cambridgeshire. We employ 36 people in a 7,500 square metre facility. And our main focus is producing paper honeycomb from recycled papers, making honeycomb boards from that honeycomb, and then converting that into industrial applications for three major sectors: the construction sector, retail and display sector, and the industrial packaging sector. COVID has thrown quite a bit of a curveball in, but we've plenty of resilience in the business to have withstood that. We've seen the construction and the retail display businesses go down a little bit, but the good news is the industrial packaging side has been racing ahead. which is really in line with the plan we set out with some time ago. We set out on a business transformation program probably 2017, 16, 17. We're well onto that journey now. We're seeing that growth. We've had some challenges embedding the new skills into the business. And at the same time, we've been putting lots of new technology into the business as well. So again, that has presented itself with some challenges. But I suppose in the theme of this overall manufacturing summit, we're now at base camp, and we're looking to scale that next stage now. Some might like to say we're at the heel of the hockey stick, looking straight up the shaft, and we're actually now looking at the next stage, which is probably going to go a lot faster than the phase that we've just come through. Mm-hmm. So lots of challenges on skills and technology and new manufacturing bits, really.
Okay.
We've not got to a stage where we need to be looking at big automation and robotics yet. We've still got a bit to do in that mainstream to get everything embedded in the business to really catapult on from there.
Okay, thanks for that, Tony. And just again, a reminder to the audience, Q&A chat function's open, so please fire some questions in. Okay, over to Dr. Nigel Bannister. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about what you do and what they do at the University of Leicester?
Hi, Neil. Thanks. Hello, everyone. I don't generally use the doctor title unless it's students in front of me. So
okay.
Yeah. So Nigel Bannister. I'm a space scientist at the University of Leicester. I'm the director of the skills and training activity at the new space park, which is about to open at Leicester, and I'm also the academic lead on an industry and employer-led trailblazer group delivering space apprenticeship standards. So apprenticeship standards for the advanced manufacturing aspect of the space sector, and that's led by Airbus. So this conference is really well timed. It comes just after UK Space Agency released its first major survey on the skills needs of the space sector. Obviously, space is a very good example of advanced manufacturing. It's quite niche in terms of some of the skills and behaviors that it requires, but I think it's a sector which is exhibiting the same opportunities, but also facing the same challenges as we see elsewhere in advanced manufacturing. And so there's a lot of concern over the level of preparedness of graduates, for example, coming from the sector, the alignment between the knowledge and skills of graduates as they leave university and what employers need. And I think that affects everyone in the advanced manufacturing sector. And so I think in order to tackle these challenges, we really need to be thinking in a different way about how industry and employers and academia interact, and the kind of service that academia can provide to industry. So that's something that I'm really interested in exploring further.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. Again, we've got some questions coming in, hopefully. So that's good. Okay. Over to you then, Alan Anderson, please. If Alan, you can introduce yourself.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. As Neil says, my name is Alan Anderson. I'm the Programme Director at the High Value Manufacturing Catapult. For those of you who don't know us, the HVM Catapult consists of 7 world-class technology and innovation centres, including the Manufacturing Technology Centre, our host here today. And we're committed to enabling the transformation necessary for the UK to enjoy the societal, environmental and economic benefits of a vibrant, innovation-led manufacturing sector. We covered 27 main technology areas and spanned sectors from transport to pharmaceuticals and from construction to energy, which gives us a unique position, able to survey the breadth of the industrial horizon and to transfer learning between sectors to accelerate and de-risk innovation. Now, historically, the HVM Catapult's involvement in skills and workforce development has been quite limited, but experience has taught us what might seem obvious with hindsight, which is that technological innovation without the associated skills in the workforce will not deliver the transformative impact that we're looking for. So back in January last year, the HVM Catapult published its report, Manufacturing the Future Workforce, which was based on extensive benchmarking and manufacturing of skills provision around the world. The report, which is supported and funded by the Gatsby Foundation and delivered in partnership with TWI, with the Institute for Manufacturing and with the National Physics Laboratory, recognised that the UK is experiencing a workforce crisis with an acute skills gap, which is preventing manufacturers from exploiting new technologies successfully. The report presented a blueprint for the way forward and a systematic view of an approach to enabling the right skills in the right place at the right time to meet the future needs and opportunities of the manufacturing sector. At the heart of the recommendation really was the introduction of a skills value chain to promote visibility of a common purpose and connectivity between the different stakeholders in the training provision. And we believe that the deployment of the skills value chain model has the potential to deliver a competitive advantage for the UK manufacturing by better aligning the talents and skills of the workforce with emerging technology and productivity opportunities. Just today, we've announced that the HVM Catapult will lead the new Emerging Skills project, which is funded by the Department for Education to help develop high-quality modular courses focused on upskilling employees to address future skills gaps in the sectors such as manufacturing and engineering. And starting now, the HVM Catapult will use its technological and industrial know-how to understand future skills needs and work with the institutes of technology to develop cutting-edge training material focusing on new and emerging technologies such as robotics and AI, additive manufacturing, composite materials. And that activity will pilot through the remainder of this year with the potential to roll out on a wider scale after this. We see that the pilot as an exciting first opportunity to address an existing market failure and to establish new good practices in the deployment of the skills value chain tool. So it's a good day to be here to discuss this topic with you. And I look forward to our debate. Thank you. Neil, you're muted.
I was sorry about that. Yeah, my dog was barking, so I muted myself. Okay. Finally, then, can we go over to David Hughes from the Advanced Manufacturing Training Centre here at the MTC?
Great. Thanks, Neil. Thank you, everybody. As Neil said, my name is David Hughes. I'm the Managing Director of the Advanced Manufacturing Training Centre. Just a little bit about the centre. We have, or have two centres actually. One next door to the MTC on the other side of the pond in Anstey, Coventry, and also a second centre over on the UK AEA site in Culham in Oxfordshire. Currently running levels 3, 4 apprenticeship programs, as well as commercial training delivery like HNCs and commercial adult courses. Really focusing on the product design and development apprenticeship standard, if anybody's sort of heard about that. But we also intersperse with that standard something that we call Trailblazer Plus. That is where we try and push in elements of leading edge technology into the apprenticeship program. And the reason why we do that is so that those apprentices who from 16 upwards are getting some knowledge and experience, some skills around leading edge manufacturing, like additive, for example, taking them back into their workplace and hopefully sort of generating interest and generating a bit of a pull from manufacturers. So that's on top of the apprenticeship program that we do as part of as a Catapult Centre. The other element I just wanted to pick up regarding the question really, you know, and around, you know, how can we explore that transfer? I guess one of them is that Trailblazer Plus, how we can sort of bleed into the learners, you know, those skills, those future skills that they might need. But the other thing I think that we all need to do, and this is more as employers, not as a skills provider, but how do we actually give people the time and the capacity to learn? I think we seem to have a culture in this country whereby, you know, you go to university, or you go to school, you go to university, you go to college, you do an apprenticeship or whatever, and we almost get to a point where we say, I'm done, I've stopped, I've learned enough almost. And I think there's a culture of that lifelong learning that as employers, we all need to push that into our people as well. And I think that's how, you know, we grab the nettle really and ensure that we can continue to push and embed leading edge skills into our people, because it's a continual journey that we're on. And that's it. That's all I wanted to say to start with, Neil.
Okay, thanks, David. Okay, right. So we've had some questions from the audience already. So, and thank you for Dan for these questions. I'm going to ask this first question actually back to you, David. And Dan asks, how do we make sure our technicians can acquire sometimes skills rapidly for new techniques, and even to help them to expand into new sectors? Do you want to repeat that again?
Yeah, yeah, go on.
So how do we make our technicians acquire new skills rapidly in new techniques, and then enable that company to expand into new sectors?
Oh, right. Okay. I think I guess it links a little bit to what I've just said almost, that there's a culture of continual learning. I think that, you know, when I said that as employers, we need to provide the time for people to excuse me, to learn. But I think the individual has to grab that nettle as well. And, you know, professional engineering, for example, and the thirst for knowledge is really, really important. And having that culture in those technicians that are searching out new opportunities is a way that, you know, bringing that back to the organization, and the organization making sure that they're giving them the time and the opportunity to develop and advance their knowledge, I think is how we continue that improvement cycle. So it's not a one fits all sort of solution. It's a number of elements that all need to come together, from the individual that needs to be able to understand what they need to know, from the employer giving them the capacity and maybe even the funding to go out and get some of those knowledge and those skills, to us as providers making sure that those skills are available for them to be able to learn. So I think there's a number of things, and I don't think it's just a single answer, to be honest. Yeah.
So I mean, the technicians have to want to learn as well. You know, have some sort of skin in the game in terms of wanting to improve effectively. Is that's what you're saying?
It is, and it takes time. It's not easy, is it? You know, when you've got all the other elements of life that you're dealing with, you know, you have to give yourself the capacity to learn and to pick up new skills. But you know, that's not an easy thing to do. You know, like I say, it takes time, it takes money, it takes effort. But I think that's a cultural thing that we all probably have to embrace, that it's the right thing to do for any organization to give employers the capacity. So if we're thinking about improving productivity, if we're thinking about innovation, if we're thinking about leading edge technology, all of that takes time, takes effort away from, you know, making of the widget or developing the solution or whatever we're doing. You know, that has to be built into the solutions within the organization.
Yeah, I mean, a key word in Dan's first question is rapidly. Is there a way of fast tracking skills and training into people? Can we accelerate that?
I'm not sure you can necessarily. Well, you can accelerate. I think it's some of the solutions that we're providing. So, for example, and COVID has sort of given us the push really to go down this route quicker, is providing innovative solutions that you can do from your bedroom, you can do from your lounge, you can do from, you know, your kitchen. And, you know, if we can use technology, if we can use VR and other solutions, but actually do it via a screen like this, and you're doing it at 10 o'clock at night, maybe, or before you go to work, or in your lunch hour. You know, if those solutions are there, and it's quick snippets and information that people can grab quickly, that I think that's one of the ways of doing it. But of course, we as a provider have to make sure that we are, you know, we've got those solutions on tap and available.
Yeah.
You know, but from our perspective, we're lucky being part of the Catapult Centre that we can be at the forefront of some of that knowledge and turn it into some of those solutions.
Okay, thanks. I might come back to you later on that one, David, because I think in my mind that getting knowledge over to somebody quickly does or is affected by the quality of some of the training and the courses. And I know at the AMTC you design and deliver training courses, so I might come back to you on that one, David. Okay, so second question again from Dan is, and I'm going to ask this to you, Tony. How do we keep our more experienced / mature workers engaged and up to speed with emerging technologies? Now, I think you've got a fairly varied age profile in your workforce, if I remember, Tony. So,
yes, and it sort of varies in terms of levels of capability as well. We've had long-term employees in the business, and one of the challenges there with a lot of the people is they've come from the town. They know what they know and have learnt what they have in our business, which has been pretty good to from a point of view of where we were, but where we want to go is a completely different world we're going to. And that has given its challenges. Some people can't recognise the gap, and then that sort of tends you to say, well, do I need to bring in other people? The workforce as a whole, though, are good, and they're willing and wanting to learn. So I think we've got that benefit going for us. We've driven the senior management and changed the senior management team. Yeah. And I think our focus now really to look at these things now is to get the supervisors and the operators now really up to speed on the new technology. We're doing that through introducing data capture and things like that, and then showing them how we actually are intending to make the changes. You know, these are the downtimes, and you know, it's mainly this area. Let's have a go at that, and then trying to transfer the skills into them that way. They've not been used to thinking that way before. So the younger ones probably get it a bit more than the older ones, which is probably typical to what we always see. But
do you mix the classes up then, Tony?
Sorry?
Do you mix the training up with the young and the old together, or?
We do, yes.
Yeah.
And
how do you measure? Sorry, Tony. Sorry to interrupt. Carry on.
And new people with existing people as well.
Right. Okay.
Because you know, the existing people that know the processes that we've got pretty well. New people coming in with different skills look at it totally different, so they can learn together. That's a good way of driving that forward, and that's been quite successful for us today.
Okay. And how do you measure how successful your training's been?
Generally by if it's process related, for example, we will take that from the data capture system now.
All right. Okay.
What you can do with that data capture is you can look at the different where you're classing whether it's an older or long established employee versus a new one. And I think the new people that are coming in have quite a different view to perhaps the older ones. The older ones tend to see it as a big brother.
Yeah, right, okay, yeah. So there's a lot of suspicion there.
Yeah, whereas the other guys, the newer guys and the younger guys treat it as an information base. Yeah, okay, well, we can do this then, we can do that. So they start looking for the solution to improving things. We have taken on board a continuous improvement manager recently, And he is spending a lot of time with those guys as well. So again, it's communicating our business plans and strategy to the guys on the shop floor. So again, we're spending a lot of time communicating that with them, so they understand I'm doing this for whatever reason, how it fits in the overall plan.
Yeah. And when they do the skills and training in your company, is that so you say you've got this data capture, so is it, are you accumulating a sort of a skills base sort of measures what sort of stage people are at then?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying? Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Thank you for that, Tony. Right. Moving on to the next question. It's from Sharon. Thank you very much, Sharon. I'm going to ask this one to Phil. And the question is, do you think recruiting on attitude rather than skill is a more reliable indicator of success for a business about to move into a more transformative way of working?
Good question. I think probably initially it depends how much of a hurry you're in. If you've got an immediate need to get something done, then yes, if you haven't got those skills in-house already, you've probably got to get someone who is the whole package that can hit the ground running. But I think that's probably a short-term view. It'll get the job done quicker initially. But in terms of kind of the success of the team and the success of the business in the long term, in our experience, we've always preferred to home grow that talent. So yeah, I would always prefer, if I'm not rushed, to recruit someone with, you know, the right attitude, an aptitude to learn, you know, an appetite to learn. And I think that will give you then an employee who you can adapt as the business evolves. You know, they can grow with it. I also think if you go out and hire someone who's the whole package by poaching them from somewhere else, then they probably going to do the same thing to you again. They'll jump ship, you know, to somewhere else that offers them more money. You know, but also they're going to come in with a preconceived, you know, idea of what they're going to do because, well, you know, I ran this machine in my old place, and so I know exactly what to do. You know, and sort of maybe a bit of an ego and not fit in necessarily with the team. Whereas if you bring in someone who's got, you know, not the whole package of skills, but the right attitude, the right skill set, then instantly they come in, they're trying to integrate with their colleagues to learn from them. You know, they don't come in with that ego. You give them a set of skills and help them grow, and actually you buy a lot of loyalty from them, you know, in that respect. And certainly that's how we've managed to build a team who stick with us. You know, as a small business, you know, I think you want that core team to grow with you. And so, yeah, we've got, you know, our business has become a lot more technical over the years. And, you know, our guys have progressed with the business. And so, you know, if you like, you know, in a small business, there's not a very big ladder to climb, but actually if the whole ladder is kind of escalating up as the business, you know, technology requirements escalate up, then you can hang on to those people because you can keep challenging them over many years. So I think, yeah, rounding back on the question, yeah, definitely, I would prefer to work on attitude, but sometimes it's going to take time to then get the job done for what you need.
So just following on from that, Phil, you say you prefer attitude, which I completely agree with. Have you got a good source of good attitude people? Where would you go for? Where would you find people with a good attitude?
That's a very good question. I mean, actually, what we tend to do for our kind of low-skilled starter roles, if you like, our machine operators, is we actually use temporary agency staff a lot, and it's a sort of try before you buy. You know, you get them. A lot of manual skills on machines are very hard to assess in an interview environment, you know, and you can't justify always going through a big sort of, you know, recruitment process and aptitude tests to fill every shop floor role. But you get someone in, you know, and hit the ground running with them and see how they cope. And after a couple of months, you can tell whether they're a keeper and they've got the ability to grow or not. So actually, over the years, that's probably been the most effective way for us. But also, you're bringing in guys, you know, who are grateful for the opportunity. You know, you haven't poached them from somewhere else and given them a bigger expectation. They've come in just because they want to work. You put them actually on the job and assess them while they're doing it, and that to us is probably the most effective.
Yeah. So do you have like a probationary sort of period for new employees?
Yeah, it depends on the role, but yeah, our preferred way of doing it is get them in on a 3-month probation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can tell, someone can keep up an act for a week, but for 3 months you get to know them pretty well, and you see them in a lot of different contexts. You see how they interact with the rest of the team, and how quickly they can pick up new skills. And that's what we're really looking for is people that can pick things up fast, communicate well, listen well. That's the key for us. We like I say, technology is moving on fast, the business is moving on fast, so I don't know necessarily what skills I need in a year's time. But I want people that have got a good solid foundation, basic engineering skills. When we talk about some of the more transformational techniques, someone that's got just a basic understanding of an awareness of digital manufacturing, but they don't need to be able to do it all. They just need to understand, why automation is a benefit and not a threat, for example.
Yeah.
So they've then got the appetite to learn.
Okay. Thank you, Phil. Okay. I'm going to take another question from the audience, and I'm going to ask this one to you, Nigel, because you did mention that you've got an apprentice scheme at Leicester. So the question is, what advantage does an employer get from taking on apprentices? Is it a big investment of time?
Yeah, this is a really great question. So I'd like to answer this with caveating it to some extent and saying, I'm not first and foremost an employer. I'm coming at it from the provider point of view, but also answering from the perspective of somebody who's immersed in a group that is dominated by employers who have actually sought to create some apprenticeships for that particular sector. So I think the first point to say is that I don't think anybody's suggesting that apprenticeships are the only route, and I know that's not what the questioner is implying here. But there's obviously a lot of emphasis on apprenticeships, coming from government, for example, really promoting the concept of apprenticeships as a cornerstone of our national technical education program. So I'm not going to mention the names, but just sort of relate to you some discussions that have gone on within the Apprenticeship Trailblazer group to illustrate the perspectives of employers who are really engaged with this. So one of the employers came up with a really good analogy, and they said, apprenticeships are couched in terms of knowledge, skills, and behaviors. So we think about a recruit in terms of those properties that they offer and how well those are aligned with the needs of the business. And they said, well, when we recruit, in this case, graduates from university courses, we get people with most of the knowledge, almost none of the skills, and few of the behaviors, but with an expectation on salary because they have a degree. Whereas when I take on an apprentice, I get ultimately all of the knowledge, and I get all of the skills, and I get all of the behaviors. And I end up with somebody who is much more attuned, if anything, much more loyal to the business. I think that the points that Phil was making a moment ago about the difference in philosophy and the difference in attitude you get, whether you bring in somebody, dare I say it, sort of from the ground up, or you take somebody from another company, is really significant. A lot of our Trailblazer Group members fall within the SME category, certainly small employers. Obviously, for small employers, there's a bit of an issue because they're not necessarily levy payers, but they still get the opportunity to have a chunk of the training paid for by government. But they report problems because they say that the big players in the field, they have the effect of driving up salaries and driving up salary expectations. So if they want to bring skills into the company, with experienced intake, they find that they're having to pay, salary levels that they just can't sustain because the big players are the ones that are pushing this up. And they see apprenticeships as a really important route to providing new capabilities and to grow capability from the grassroots. I think one of the very frequent sort of observations or complaints from employers is that the new intake, that they may come with qualifications, but those qualifications don't seem to translate into the skills and the capabilities that they really need. Remember that apprenticeships have to be delivered against standards. Who designs those standards? It's not academia. It's largely the employer group. So a group of employers who should be representative of your sector are responsible for prescribing, at least at the top level, what that training needs to cover. But as an employer, you still have control, because while the prescription is top level, there's a very broad scope for discussing with the provider precisely what it is that you need from your apprentice. The objective is not to produce somebody who is an absolute perfect fit to your business, but nobody else, because transferability is an objective in apprenticeships. But nevertheless, the training that you get is really focused, and as a business, you have a lot of control over what it is that your apprentice is trained in. So it is a big investment in time. But I would argue that the apprentice should be being productive from a very early stage in their work with you. And you need to trade that off against perhaps higher salary expectations from a more experienced person, and the need to then provide more training at additional cost, because you're still likely to need to provide some focus in their skills. So that would be my response to the question.
Can I add a little bit to that as well, Neil, if that's
certainly
right?
Certainly, David. Yeah.
I was just sort of looking at as well. We've sort of got this challenge of an apprenticeship being somebody who can't get to university, for example, that old sort of route, that needs to get thrown out with the rubbish, really, that, it's an equal choice. You can either go to university or you can do an apprenticeship. It's as good as each other. And I think that's one of the things that we need to get clear. The other thing is, and just picking up Nigel's point about all of those benefits that an apprentice coming to your business gives your organization, isn't just anymore, it was years ago, it isn't just anymore at level 3, for example, that sort of A-level route. You don't have to take on a graduate anymore to bring an apprentice in to fill a graduate role. You can go and do a degree apprenticeship. So all of those great value benefits that the apprentice is bringing you can now be almost at all of those levels, all the way up to a master's level, if the standard is there. So I think that's the other thing that we need to say to ourselves. It's in some respects, it's giving you the equal choice of saying, do I bring a graduate in for the value and the benefits a graduate gives me at a degree level, or do I bring an apprentice in and train them to degree level with all the values and the benefits that the apprentice gives me? So I think there's so much more choice these days than there was even as little as 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Could I just add a little bit to that?
Certainly, Nigel. Yeah.
And just say, I completely agree. And I think one of the things that some employers may not be completely aware of is that the degree that comes through a degree apprenticeship is not necessarily the same as the degree that would come from a normal route. So even in the case of degree apprenticeships, you are really in the driving seat in terms of precisely what skills that person brings to your company. This is really a major shift in an element of higher education. I've heard comments from some companies that actually, if these degree apprenticeships provide the benefits that they look like they will, then the number of ordinary graduate program places is likely to go down, and there be a shift towards degree apprenticeships as an approach. So I think we're on the. I think it's probably fair to say that there's still some uncertainty about how it's going to work out for every field, but I do feel like we're on the kind of the cusp of quite a significant change in this part of the education program.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. Any more comments on that question? No. Okay, Alan, I'm conscious of the fact that I've not brought you into play yet. You've been on the bench for a while now, so I want to get you on the field. Okay, so may not be totally applicable to yourself, but I'm sure you'll give a great answer. And the question from Sharon is, it's a bit of a sort of a criticism of, I guess, of society today and the education and skills policy of governments past and present. But the question is, the skills gap created by the dissipation of apprenticeships over the decades, coupled with a push for university as opposed to vocational training, has created a situation we have in today's manufacturing environment. I'm interested to know what the HMVC, how they see that as one. Is it a valid comment, and how we sort of bridge that gap now? How can we quickly fill in these gaps and move forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting point, and I mean, there's no question. I think any of us who work in manufacturing would identify with the fact that there is a huge perception issue in most of the population with regard to what manufacturing is, particularly what advanced manufacturing is. And the sort of image of the smoking chimneys and the dark furnaces and all the rest of it, and the sort of filthy environment that people work in is a million miles away from the reality of a lot of modern manufacturing. But the perception is real, and that perception puts people off, puts young people off getting involved in the sorts of subjects that might lead to a manufacturing career. And there is undoubtedly work which needs to be done in order to change that perception. It's something that the High Value Manufacturing Catapult is involved with to a degree. We do a lot of outreach activities to schools and to communities to try and help people to understand a bit more of the reality of what manufacturing is today, and I suppose more importantly where we see manufacturing being in 10, 20, 30 years time. And there's a brilliant canvas that we can paint that story on at the moment. The challenge of net zero, the challenge of sustainability in manufacturing and in life in general. Manufacturing has got a fundamental part to play in that. Society is going to call on manufacturing to deliver the products that it needs to live in the way that we want to live going forward, so that we can save our planet and get ourselves through the environmental crisis that we're in and come out in one piece at the other side of it, hopefully. There's been some fantastic examples in the last 12 months through the COVID crisis of where manufacturing has really stepped up and has made a tremendous difference to the outcomes that we've seen. There have been far too many tragic stories associated with the last 12 months, but there are also things that we should celebrate in terms of the likes of the ventilator challenge. We spoke about ventilators earlier on. The team from the High Value Manufacturing Catapult that stepped up and led the Ventilator Challenge UK consortium produced as many ventilators in 12 weeks as we'd normally produce in 20 years, so that the NHS was not short of ventilators, is one story. And the way that they brought together a broad spectrum of principally manufacturing and supply chain companies to do that, where we had naturally competitor companies working together in the national interest. That was a fantastic example of what manufacturing is really about. The work which is going on still with manufacturing in the vaccine environment, totally different sort of thing. Manufacturing drugs, if you like, rather than machinery, but it's still high value manufacturing, and it's still within the scope of what we look at. And again, if you go and see the facilities that we've got up in the northeast of England, where the National Biologics Manufacturing Centre, a million miles away from your Black Country foundry that people might think of. And also just thinking about the way that so many manufacturing companies have shown their agility and their commitment to helping society, in the way that they've pivoted what they've done in the last sort of 12 months or so, moving from making gin to making hand sanitizer, moving from making all sorts of other products to making personal protective equipment for the NHS, for care homes and for individuals and so on. Yes, recognizing an opportunity, but actually showing that they've got those sort of dynamic capabilities within their businesses to pivot what they do, and the skills. And we've just been talking about the importance of attitude and so on, but the skills and the attitude in order to pivot the offering that the companies do. Those are the sorts of stories that I think we should be trying to promote about manufacturing, which actually, I can get really passionate about it, but I think, it engages people, and it's the sort of thing that people will want to be a part of if they get exposed to those stories. Mm-hmm. So that, coupled with, the vision that we've got for manufacturing over the next 10 and 20 years, I think is really where we ought to be concentrating. But I'd absolutely agree that there's a lot of work to do to change that perception.
Yeah. Okay. Just going back to the ventilator challenge and the way that the country and organisation responded to that, was it a case of the skills were there, but in a latent sense, we didn't actually know they were there, or did people learn skills very quickly, or why do you think we were so successful in meeting that challenge?
There were a variety of things that came into play. I think, firstly, there was a call to get a group of people together. And there were people who clearly recognised that there was a job to be done. And, if you look around, there isn't a ventilator challenge team sort of sat on the sidelines waiting to step up. And mm-hmm. The group of people realised that if it was going to happen, they had to get off the bench and do it themselves, sort of thing. And fortunately, we had the right people with the attitude to do that. The skills one is a really interesting one. I mean, one of the things that was very interesting in the ventilator challenge was that a number of Formula One teams were involved. Now, most of those Formula One teams are based in the UK. And of course, last year, there was no Formula One racing at the time that we were talking. We were talking pretty much exactly 12 months ago. The Formula One season had been put on hold. All of those people were, to a certain extent, sat around twiddling their thumbs. But they have the attitude of doing things in short time scales, flexibly, a real will do, not a can do, but a will do attitude. At all costs, we will overcome whatever challenge is put in front of us. Mm-hmm. And the Ventilator Challenge team called on a number of those Formula One teams and the engineers who were sat at home looking for a challenge, basically, and gave them something really to focus on. And they stepped up. And in conjunction with, rolling out all sorts of digital techniques in order to train people in a safe environment using augmented reality, virtual reality, digital production manuals, things of that sort. It was a real opportunity to bring new digital technologies together with some available skills and motivated people to really deliver for the nation. And it's an extraordinary story of triumph, really.
Thank you. So the moral of the story is, if next time we have a crisis, we cancel the Formula One season.
Certainly having the availability of that talent. I mean, it wasn't the only talent that fed into it. There was a lot of others from the likes of Airbus and Rolls-Royce and Ford and other companies around the country, and an awful lot of companies in the supply chain who did some extraordinary things to start making bits for ventilators, where we went from making ventilators which were being produced at a rate of 10, 15 a week, to producing hundreds and hundreds a day, and the supply chain flexibility and the new suppliers who came on and used their capability in order to deliver for that. It's just a fantastic story, you know, just layer on layer of real determination and endeavor to meet the challenge that they were given.
Okay, thank you, Alan. I'm going to ask a question myself now, actually, and I'm going to ask this to Phil and Tony as employers. Now, when I was a young lad, a long time ago now, thinking about what I was going to do when I left school, the last thing I wanted to do was work in a factory. And I've been in manufacturers now nearly for 40 years. So something went wrong. But do you honestly get people that come into new starters come into your business that actually want to work in manufacturing? Is that something you find?
Yeah, it's you know, certainly for us, I mean, it's really refreshing when you do find it, because there's not enough of it. I think, I mean, we go and I go and talk in schools locally quite a bit, and actually the kids in schools have got an appetite for it. You know, just like every subject, you know, there are kids at school who enjoy design and technology. You know, they enjoy tinkering with, you know, with their bike or their motorbike, or, you know, they go and spend time in granddad's workshop. They like making stuff with their hands, and maybe also they acknowledge that maybe, you know, writing essays and things like that is not their skill, and university isn't the right route for them to progress through. Mm-hmm. In fact, frustratingly, what I often find when I go into schools is I've got a pretty good queue of kids at a careers fair that want to come and talk about what it would be like to come and work in, you know, an environment, a manufacturing environment like ours. And actually it's their parents that talk them out of it. And that's what rounds back to what Alan was saying about perception of the industry. And I think we can all bash on about government policy and all the rest of it, but actually as manufacturers, we've got to take responsibility ourselves for raising the profile of the industry. And things like the ventilator challenge, things like Formula One, you know, are all they're the good news stories, that the slightly more glamorous end of things, you know, if you take something like Formula One, but, you know, they're actually how we can do real good. I mean, you know, a lot of my employees, you know, here over the past year have been saying, you know, for years, you know, my kids or my family or my friends thought I just make metal boxes. Now I'm saying I'm making ventilators, suddenly I'm a rock star. You know, and so that perception of how important manufacturing is really key, because then you will get kids that are coming up through school who want to come and get their hands dirty. But also, like we've said before, it's not like it was. You know, these aren't the dark satanic mills. You know, we've got some really exciting kit. We make some really exciting parts. But yeah, we've just got to get that story out there. Once we get people, you know, into, you know, young people and potential recruits in to come and walk around the place, see the feel of the team and the buzz, see the kind of kit that we're using, the technology, see the career opportunities as well. Because let's be honest, you know, I mean, you know, manufacturing, okay, you might start at a basic level, but, you know, top level manufacturing engineers are making good money, you know, even on a graduate, you know, kind of relative scale. You know, there are good opportunities in manufacturing, but we've just got to get that story out there.
Yeah. Tony?
Yeah, I agree with that. And one of the things we spend a lot of time at our local manufacturing club is going into the schools and talking as manufacturers. And it's really exciting to see the knowledge and the skills that some of the children have as well at that young age. And it's our job to get them into our businesses now. I think a lot of the perceptions come from the parents. And it's not until you actually then start having tours around your factory that some of these youngsters think exactly what Phil was saying. Wow, look at that. And if I can do that, you know, that really makes a difference. I think the perception comes from us old timers, maybe, that manufacturing, or, you know, mum and dad that always saw manufacturing that way. So it's changing the perception of the parents as much as it is the youngsters.
Can I add to that? Sorry, Neil.
Certainly, David. Yeah.
As well, just from a teacher perspective, you know, the teacher has a huge part to play in this. You know, yes, we've got our parents that can influence, and I think there's some really good statistics that from a diversity perspective, you know, if your father, for example, or your mother is an engineer, you know, one of your children, so a female, for example, is likely to go into engineering. You know, she's seen her parents and she's seen her mother maybe who's an engineer, or a father who's an engineer, and she wants to go into an engineer. So parents is key. But I think the other side of this is teachers is massive as well. You know, we really need to break down the barriers around, you know, it's a girl career or it's a male career, you know, a female career. It's a career for anybody. And also the teachers, if they've got a passion for manufacturing or, you know, engineering or something like that, that goes into the children. There's no doubt about that. And I think from us as employers, we need to open our doors more and get those teachers somehow into our organizations, and get that sort of passion reignited with those teachers, you know, that are teaching our children and teaching our future STEM workforce. So parents, absolutely, but I think teachers are the other one as well that we need to engage.
Yeah, I totally agree with that there, David. I mean, I can remember when I was at school, you know, it was all about you've got to do well in your exams so you can become a lawyer or a doctor or even a teacher, but manufacturing was never ever mentioned. So yeah, I agree there. Yeah. We're coming to the sort of end now. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to finish on one last question, and it's regarding how skilled operators can sort of learn soft skills and move into management. Who would like to take that question from the panel? So supervisors who or skilled operators who want to move into management, but don't believe they've got the soft skills. How do organisations manage that?
I could probably chip in a little bit there. I mean, it depends what you define as management. You know, obviously, I mean, you know, a lot of my shop floor kind of, you know, you have your shop floor operators and they progress through the, you know, the technician levels. You know, you have you know, I mean, our supervisors on the shop floor are some of the best managers I know. You know, so there's the supervisory skills, but if you're talking about the kind of, you know, management in terms of the wider skills, a nice transition skill we've used are business improvement techniques. So we've actually put a lot of our guys through NVQs, you know, up to level 4 in business improvement techniques. And that's something which I think is a nice transition, because it gets them to think beyond the task-based, you know, activities of manufacturing, and more into the why they're doing what they're doing and what it achieves, and how to optimize a process, and how to work together as a team, and how to write up some of those activities as a report that give them some of those skills that are more associated with office-based management type tasks than just button pushing, you know, kind of workshop tasks. So kind of, you know, for that transition, I think you want people to understand the wider considerations of the business rather than just the individual tasks. So we've found NVQs in business improvement techniques to be a really nice bridge, you know, from one to the other.
I just to add into that, I think we fail people at that sort of supervisory leadership management level. I think we have excellent people in our businesses who then sort of progress up, and then we don't really give them a lot of those softer skills in a lot of organizations, and they end up being poor managers but were wonderful engineers. And it's a skill set that I think we seem to think that they just, you know, where we might give them, you know, technical skills, I don't think we do enough of giving people those softer skills, those people skills, those, you know, behavioral skills that they need to use with the level of supervisory or leadership or management. So I think from my perspective, I've seen some great engineers fail over the years in that management level because we just think they can become great managers, and it's never always the way.
Okay. Chris, how long have we got? Have we got to finish on the hour, or have we got a bit longer?
No, we can run for another 5 minutes.
Okay, run for another 5 minutes. Okie dokie. Right then. So we've got a question here from Jake, and he's saying, what are the new skills required by manufacturers now and in the future for the adoption of new technologies such as additive manufacturing? David, do you want to just pick that one up, and then I'll ask that to Alan, and following you, David.
Yeah, well, I guess there's a huge number of skills around prototyping and on all of that, but I think in some respects it's probably better the manufacturers answer that question more than me. I mean, my role, I guess, is to develop the courses to suit that need, but from an additive perspective, you know, there's all of the prototyping, rapid prototyping that you know, we need to provide, you know, the people who are coming in to get those skills. So I think it's a combination of things, but I think it needs to be developed more from a manufacturing perspective of what they need, more than us as a provider in some respects.
Yeah. Alan, would you like to comment on additive manufacturing?
Yeah,
and skills required.
Yeah, a bit about additive, I suppose, and more generally as well. I mean, I suppose one of the things that additive manufacturing brings is the ability to create shapes that we've never been able to make sort of in a structurally sound sort of way before, or to be able to do it in far more accurately and in far more robust materials and things of that sort. So that there's a design challenge as well as the actual manufacturing challenge, if you like, that goes with it. You know, and it's true of many of these advanced technologies, is that actually there's a challenge for the designers in how do we take advantage of those as much. So there's a new skill set in design as well as in manufacturing. But absolutely, in terms of, you know, additive, all of the different materials and the different material handling processes that there are and things of that sort. But what I'd just like to say as well is that alongside a lot of these new technologies, one of the main things that's coming out of the emerging skills project that I mentioned at the beginning is a foresighting activity where we're running projects which are developing new technologies. One of the key things that we're going to be doing in future, which has probably been missed to a certain extent in the past, but we're going to be looking at what will be the workforce development requirements in order to be able to embrace those new technologies when they hit the factory floor. So that in parallel with developing new technologies, we're going to be developing the workforce development activities that go along with them, so that you know, we can try and do those two concurrently, so that we get fewer occasions where new technologies become available, but we've got no one who knows how to drive them. Yeah, which has been a real failing in the past. And you know, that it's applies to additive certainly, but it applies to a lot of new technologies that we can see in the pipeline now, and those that we can't see yet. But I think that new approach will make a big difference to the ability of companies to adopt those technologies rapidly when they become available.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Okay, we're running out of time, so I'm going to very quickly go around the panel and just in a couple of sentences, how you, if you want to say a closing sentence on today's session. I'll go with you first, Phil.
Yeah, I mean, I think really interesting discussion. I think the main sort of takeaway from me is that really with a lot of these new skills, we've just got to view them as tools that are additional. You know, it's not in isolation, but additional to the basic engineering, manufacturing skills that have always been the foundation. And if you give your staff that foundation understanding, you know, and then embellish it with these new techniques, that's far more effective than if you kind of, you know, just think that you need to bring in a new team to do these new things. Take your existing team with you and build them up with the new technologies.
Okay, thank you. Nigel?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And the other thing I would say, and this comes on the back of the space survey, for employers to not be shy in coming forward to education providers, whether they be FE, HE or specialist, because we are ready to try and help deliver these skills. But it's not always easy from our perspective to horizon scan and understand where the key critical points are. And they're going to vary from employer to employer. So I would like to see a much more sort of energetic dialogue between employers and providers.
Thank you, Nigel. Alan?
Yeah, I think for me, key is something that's been talked about, which is this creating a culture of lifelong learning. Phil's just mentioned it now. We're on the brink of an incredible manufacturing transformation, and the vast majority of the workforce who are going to deliver that transformation are already in the workforce. They're not people who are at school, they're not people who are about to go to university, they're people who have been working for 10, 15, 20 years already. And we've got to make sure that we've got the culture that those people want to learn how to deliver that transformation, and we've got to make sure that we've got the infrastructure that can deliver the skills that they're going to need to do that with as well. So for me, it's that culture of lifelong learning supported by a real infrastructure to deliver those lifelong skills is critical for the future.
Thank you, Alan. Tony?
As SMEs, we don't have deep pockets and to go out and get a lot of the skills that we want. We don't necessarily have the job that would fill the time. And I think that networking and association with centres of excellence like the MTC, the IFM, and anywhere in the Catapult is a good starting point to start the initial stage of getting those skills on board to get us over those hurdles. And networking, I think across manufacturing is a good way of seeing what other technologies are coming as well, so you can prepare and get ready for them. But one way to get over that initial hurdle is to get whatever you can out of the Catapult, I suppose.
Yeah, nice comment, Tony. And David, finally from you.
Yeah, thank you. I guess don't disagree with anything anybody said. I think there's a couple of things for me is skill space is so complicated. Nigel will probably agree, being in the skills world, it's not easy when you look at apprenticeships or funding or trying to find a provider and all of that. It's a challenge. We've developed something called the SME support service with Lloyds Bank to try and sort of remove and demystify some of that complexity and provide funding for SMEs, break down some of the challenges around how do you get funding, what training can you get. So, we've developed that. And I think part of that is about us all working together, I think, as well. Making sure that we're not developing, and we've probably all seen this, lots of different solutions to solve the same problem. I think coming together, working together and finding the one solution is going to be much more efficient and much more sensible as a way forward than lots and lots of pockets of the same solutions, if that makes sense, across the country. So working together, removing complexity. And I think, we've not really mentioned the Skills for Jobs white paper. Nigel mentioned about putting employers at the heart of it. That's what that paper is there to do. And I think hopefully that's the catalyst from the Education Secretary to try and make that happen. But I think we all need to play our part in that as well.
Okay, thank you, David. Right, thank you very much to the panel for your very insightful views on skills and training and how to embed those future skills in to help manufacturing. Thank you very much to the audience for your questions. It meant that I didn't have to ask any of my daft questions, so that's great. And apologies for any questions that weren't asked, but we just ran out of time. It's such a great session today. I'm going to hand back now to Aaron. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil, and thanks to our panelists. We really appreciate your input on such an important topic. We're now going to have a comfort break, and we'll be back at 2:15 with Professor Sam Turner, Chief Technical Officer at the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, and we'll be discussing net zero and hitting the government Green Deal targets. Stretch your legs, grab a coffee, and we'll see you back here at 2:15. Welcome back. So for the last panel session of the day, I'm delighted to introduce Professor Sam Turner, Chief Technical Officer at the High Value Manufacturing Catapult. Sam and our expert panel will be discussing the key technologies and methodologies that are required across all the major manufacturing sectors in the UK to transform us into a net zero economy. Sam, welcome to the virtual stage.
Aaron, thank you very much. And it's a real pleasure to be here with you all this afternoon. I think when we talk about industrial transformation, there's probably no greater transformation needed than that to convert our industrial footprint to net zero by 2050. We've also had the industrial decarbonisation strategy from the government released yesterday, which is great timing. I'm sure you've all read the 170-page document already. But within there, it highlights, as well as the goal to get to 2050 and drive UK prosperity, as well as UK and global carbon emissions down, the need to reduce our emissions by 2/3 by 2035. So there is a true transformation required. I'm going to have a few poll questions open for you on VVox. So those of you who've been involved throughout the week will be familiar with that, which we'll introduce after we've introduced the speakers. And we'll run through, there'll be, if you put your questions in the chat, I'll be drawing out questions and putting them to the panel as we go through. Also reflecting on some of the responses on the VVox questions and polls to guide the conversation. But we've got an excellent panel and round of speakers. So I'm CTO of the HVM Catapult, as Aaron said, of course MC one of our centres, and we've got a pretty major focus you might expect on net zero and decarbonising or reducing emissions across our manufacturing footprint. And today we're going to talk particularly about the manufacturing elements of our emissions, although we're going to look at that from a product sector angle, as well as looking at some of the solutions that we can address to reduce emissions. So coming from a sort of product and sector view, we've got Steve Nesbitt, Chief Technology Strategy MTC, a particular focus on electrification and some great experience in the automotive sector. We've got also Katie Milne, Head of Industrial Strategy for Fly Zero programme. So a programme that's committed to reducing eliminating industrial emissions for next generation aircraft, but also part of that is looking at the industrial footprint. We have Vivian Shee, Senior Technical Consultant from Oak Dean Hollins, Professor Fiona Charnley from University of Exeter, and Associate Professor of Circular Economy and Co-Director of the Exeter Centre for Circular Economy, and also Professor Jin Chuan from Loughborough University, Head of the Department of Chemical Engineering, with a particular background in circular economy for the chemical sector. So with that, I'm going to invite our panellists just to introduce themselves and say a few words, and then we'll open up the debate. So I'll start off with Katie, please, if you'd like to just introduce yourself and your role and some of the things that you see are crucial in terms of addressing the net zero challenge for manufacturing.
So hello, I'm Katie Milne. I'm Head of Industrial Strategy for a project called Fly Zero, which is led by the UK's Aerospace Technology Institute. It's about generating the UK's roadmaps to zero carbon emissions, so not net zero, but zero carbon emissions by 2030, and asking the question, how can the UK and the capability within the UK contribute to that global effort? It's just a one-year project, and we're two months in, and it's quite an interesting project in that they've formed the project from a group of experts across industry and academia who've come together to develop these roadmaps, but also carry out a concept and prelim design of an aircraft. And we're not doing that to then necessarily go on to commercialize the aircraft, but to give us a deeper understanding in the formation of the roadmaps. So we're at the stage of understanding the core technologies, things like which fuels we use, and the trade-offs between different choices, the integration challenges of different drivetrains and airframes, and then the infrastructure challenges as well, things like how would the airports have to change. And my role within it is to work across that kind of technical team within Fly Zero, but also across UK industry to pull together the roadmaps and the economic case so that we can go to the UK government with a proposal. And I've got to ask questions like, where should the UK best put its efforts? You know, where are we best positioned in terms of our competency? And how can we get some positive side effects from playing in this area. Playing's a poor word perhaps, but you know what I mean by putting our efforts in this area, so that we have jobs in innovation and so that we anchor aerospace in the UK for the next generation. So I'm really interested in the question of how we achieve zero carbon aviation. We're looking at things at the moment like, will we be able to ramp up supply of clean fuels fast enough in order to meet demand? We want to know what the relative contribution of different parts of the life cycle are, and therefore how does that affect where we focus our efforts. So we've got some very preliminary data that suggests that maybe 80 to 90% of the emissions associated with that life cycle are all generated during flight. So is manufacturing a focus therefore for the aerospace sector, or should they put it all in the new technologies? And I'm just very interested to engage with anybody in the UK who wants to contribute towards that mission of achieving zero carbon flight by 2030.
Great. Thank you, Katie. So here's a guy with the answers. Steve, would you like to introduce yourself, please, and just share some of your thoughts on the broader challenge?
Sure. Good afternoon, Steve Nesbitt. I'm one of the chief technologists at the Manufacturing Technology Centre. MTC, Manufacturing Technology Centre, we're part of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, and within that clearly a subset of the broader Catapult fraternity across the whole of the UK. We're a specialist research and technology organisation focusing on manufacturing systems, manufacturing process, methodology, innovation, development, scale-up industrialisation, as it were. We operate, like the other Catapult centres, across every sector you could conceive. So presence from industrial drives through to construction, through to automotive, pharmaceutical, medical, you name it. There is a presence in every sector through the high-value manufacturing Catapult network and centres. The journey to net zero, so what do we think the key challenges are going to be? Well, fundamentally, policy and legislation are driving the need for this. Some are much nearer term than others, but far-reaching objectives are going to need a mobilisation of a huge number of industrial entities. And to achieve the aims and objectives that the UK government set for itself, and even global regulations will set for itself, there's a need to accelerate the development and delivery of industrialized solutions. Now, they might be software, hardware, mechanical systems or other, but there is a very clear need to integrate sort of conventional product and process engineering capabilities to enable that far greater systems engineering basis, this synergy between engineering disciplines to accelerate the delivery of technologies. Otherwise, we risk falling behind the curve, as it were, in terms of achieving this notional 2-degree absolute upper limit increase in global ambient temperatures, or face a potentially cataclysmic sort of outcome.
Brilliant. Thank you, Steve. Excellent framing for us. Fiona, please, if you'd like to just share, well, introduce yourself, please, and just share some of your thoughts on the challenges and opportunities to address net zero.
Great, thanks, Sam. I'm Fiona Charnley, and as mentioned, I'm an Associate Professor in Circular Economy and Co-Director of the Exeter Centre for the Circular Economy, which is located in the Business School at the university. I'm also a Co-Director of the recently announced National Interdisciplinary Circular Economy Research Hub, which is part of a £30 million investment by UKRI and consists of 5 national centres with an expertise in circular economy across different resource flows, including textiles, metals, chemicals, which Jin's leading, built environment and technology metals. And our role as leading the hub is to look at identifying some of those cross-cutting enablers that are common across different sectors, such as design, business models, technology, policy, in order to kind of maximize the impact of the programme as a whole, but also to hopefully accelerate and upscale circular economy implementation at a UK level. Before joining the business school, my background is actually in design and manufacture, And I'm really personally interested in how we can use digital technology to overcome some of the challenges, the environmental, economic and social challenges that we're facing today, such as more intelligent decision making, for example, around interventions during a product life cycle, or how we can use technology to select the most effective end of life strategy for some of our products, how we choose between recycling, remanufacture and reuse, and also how we can enable new and more effective partnerships across the supply chain, which we definitely need to do in order to address some of these system level challenges.
Great, thank you, Fiona. Vivian, if you'd like to again introduce yourself, please, and share some of your views on the challenges and opportunities.
Sure. So I'm Vivian. I'm a senior technical consultant at Hollins. Pleased to join you all today. I have a materials engineering background, and I joined Hollins in 2019 after graduating from my master's degree. Hollins is a research and consultancy firm specializing in circular economy. Actually, when we started, this is well before my time. When we started out, it was focusing on resource and waste management. Really focusing on, for example, waste diversion out of landfill. But obviously time and the topic has moved on, and we now find ourselves specializing in different topics under the banner of circular economy. Since I joined, I've been exposed to many different topics in many different sectors that and material flows that Fiona has just mentioned. But I think there are a couple of interesting points from different perspectives. I want to break it down from public sector and private sector type of work that I've been involved in, and some of the trends that I've sort of observed just in the brief time of joining. From the public sector, we really see many more sectors looking at extended producer responsibility, evidence base for that, and how effective it could be to drive eco-design and sustainable manufacturing. So that's a topic I'm really interested in terms of the evidence base for this kind of policy instruments. And then from the private sector, we've seen many more companies recently, asking us about what does net zero mean? What does it mean for the company to set a target for net zero in terms of timeline? What's the action plan roadmap for achieving that, and how credible this kind of commitments will be, and the level of effort that's needed to gather the evidence base to achieve that. So there are loads of questions around the implementation of net zero targets that we see many companies trying to figure out, and we'll be really interested in talking about that as well. Another topic that we really focus on is value retention, but specifically around remanufacturing. So that's another topic that I'm really interested to talk to you guys about, because that also again ties back to the scope 3 emission of the sector. So yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you. And last but not least, Jen, if you'd please like to introduce yourself as well, and just to talk through the challenges and opportunities that you see.
Sure, thank you, Sam. So hello everyone, my name is Jin Chen. I'm a professor and head of Department of Chemical Engineering at Loughborough University. I'm also leading one of the very recently launched UKI Circular Economy Centre for the chemical industry under the £30 million investment of the National Circular Economy Programme, which Fiona has just mentioned. So for us, the net zero is really a system concept, which means the whole economy needs to be achieving net zero carbon emission by 2050. So we need to understand it's a net zero, not like a gross zero, which means some sector may have like residual carbon emissions, while other sector may need to achieve negative emission to offset these residual carbons, so that overall economy will achieve the net zero emission. So therefore, we really need to adopt a whole system approach or whole system thinking. That's exactly our center is trying to do. So sometimes people tend to focus too much on a single point of emission or single manufacturing sectors. Well, you may still achieve deep decarbonization, but probably you will have the much higher cost. The solution will be much more complex, and it might not be the optimal solution from the whole system point of view. So for the worst case scenario, you may reduce the emission of your own manufacturing point, but you can increase emission for somewhere else. So it's really the whole system approach we're applying here. So we talk a lot on the industrial symbiosis, but also circular economy. So it's about to encourage the reuse and the integration of products and the byproducts and the co-products from other processes in manufacturing systems. So one obvious example we are looking at is to use the captured CO2, carbon dioxide from one manufacturing process and feed to the chemical industry to use them as a feedstock to produce platform chemicals or molecules. But the concept is much wider than that. It talks about the integration of energy, heat, other products, waste, and also the whole supply chain. So by doing this, we really want to make the chemical manufacturing industry, which currently is the second largest emission sources for the whole industrial sector, to make it to be a potentially negative emission industrial system. And really looking forward to further discussion in this panel. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you. That's a really nice finish off, I think, to the round of intros, looking at the system level challenge that we've got to face to hit net zero. And it seems there's always a potential risk with net zero that everybody claims the offset. So that system level challenge is really important. So I'd like to just remind everyone in the audience that we've got the Q&A box open, so please do pop questions in. Don't fear, because I've got plenty to talk about and I asked the panel about. I think there's some great ideas here and concepts to discuss. But we've also got a couple of questions on VVox. So again, if you've been involved throughout the week, you'll be familiar with the VVox questions. Yeah, Calvin, could you pop up the first question, please? So I think we're going to keep one of these open at a time. And the first question we've got is, from a business perspective, do we see decarbonising manufacturing as an opportunity or a threat? It's certainly a commitment we need to meet. Is that seen as a burden or an opportunity? I'll keep asking you a few questions while those are coming in. I'm hoping we get more than just get a few responses before we look at the results of that, and that will help to guide some of the questions. We've got a couple more of these, some more kind of yes/no binary questions, and a few that are multiple choice relating to yesterday's industrial decarbonisation strategy. So in the meantime, actually, I'm going to start with the last speaker and try and get some conversation going across the panel. I think there's some really interesting points across the whole panel here. But Jin, what do you think in terms of the system level view? You're absolutely right, we've got to take that. Do we need some change in the sort of cost metrics or business case? Maybe whether it be carbon pricing or other, to get that system working effectively and the industrial symbiosis, circular economy really working? What do you think we need to have in place to make the system view work effectively?
Yes, I think definitely. So on our perspective, there are definitely two major barriers. One is technical barrier. So we do need to develop new technologies to enable the circular economy and industrial symbiosis. But when we talk to industrial partners, I think the largest barrier is more on the policy side, on the business model, finance model, etc. So there's no doubt that the new decarbonization solutions are highly costly. So that's why we need to develop technologies to reduce the cost. But at the same time, we do need to have new finance models, business models as an enabler or as a push to these new industrial symbiosis or circular economy. So definitely, yeah.
Thank you. I think that makes absolute sense. We've got a related question actually from Thomas, which I'll put to you, and to the whole panel to answer. But how deep should politics support and force decarbonising? So I think particularly what's the role that government has to play to drive some of those metrics and business models you've been talking about, Jim? And that's open to anybody who in the panel would like to respond. In fact, Jim, would you like to go first? It does kind of lead on from what we've just been discussing.
Sure. I mean, in terms of political support, I think the most important thing is to set out the government's vision for the low carbon roadmap, and also to provide industry with a long-term certainty that this is a need. I think currently the UK, I think one of the disadvantages of the policy are sometimes so short-term. So it's really important to set out the long-term roadmap from the government to remove some of the uncertainties. So I think the industrial decarbonization strategy announced yesterday is something really like a positive step towards that.
Yeah, great, thank you. And Fiona, do you have any views on that to build on Jin's comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really requires kind of a clear picture from the outset about where we're focusing and kind of the prioritization, because I think, for example, a lot of climate change policies at the moment are focusing on accelerating the adoption of renewable energy and towards a renewable, energy efficiency, which obviously is a large part of the picture, but it's not necessarily the whole part. There was a report released in 2020 that highlighted that actually only 55% of greenhouse gas emissions can be addressed by renewable energy alone, and actually there's the remaining 45% that are generated directly from production. So materials, products, manufacturing all have a large part to play as well. So it's really understanding that whole picture and then developing policies and incentives that are going to meet that wide range of emissions and targets. And I think, clearly communicating that's really important.
I would wholeheartedly agree with that. And actually, I think probably where the way emissions data is broken down is related to SIC code information that we have. And manufacturing is understood to be 16%, but that relates largely just to the kind of materials extraction, materials processing elements of the manufacturing value chain. Some data we're looking at, working with a number of academic colleagues, is suggesting it could be much higher, up to 40% potentially, consider the consumption emissions for the UK. And that's the emissions associated with products and services consumed within the UK, as opposed to just those manufactured within the UK. So arguably the manufacturing challenge is much greater than even that it's been articulated thus far. Just from a kind of sector view, Katie, what's your take? Looking at the aerospace approach, what's your take on the role for government and policy to drive forward the drive to net zero?
Well, I think the case of automotive is quite interesting, because of course in aerospace so across everything they've legislated for net zero carbon, but potentially in aerospace that could be achieved during the flight stage through a number of different routes. So they could use carbon trading, they could replace fossil fuels with synthetic fuels, or fuels that have biomass in them, or they could use new propulsion systems. So that's on the one hand. And so of course, government has a key part to play in regulating it to push it towards the technology solution, a more aggressive replacement of the technology within the propulsion system, so that it doesn't create CO2 in the first place, as opposed to a kind of carbon trading or offsetting position, which is kind of being discussed in parallel. So that's the first thing. So they can be there with the stick. And I mean, I think they've done that quite effectively with automotive, because they've set specific dates for taking cars off the road now, and they haven't done that for aviation. On the manufacturing side, I think it's about helping the sector to, decarbonize. So I was talking about emissions there from flight, and one of the focuses of this is about the emissions from industry, so the production of aircraft rather than flight. And so to do that, then I think they really need help and support and incentives to change, because it's a really big thing. They've got massive capital investments.
But what's the role of the sector potentially? The aerospace sector could play a role, surely, in helping supply chains decarbonise.
Yeah. Can you give me a minute and I'll come back with some thoughts on that one.
But and just think about, you talked earlier about the opportunity for the UK. Where's the content going to be for Fly Zero? I think, can we drive that by looking at content that has a zero manufacturing footprint as well? But I'll come back to you.
No, it's okay. I've had time. Sorry. Yeah. So we are in Fly Zero. We're looking at a whole life cycle analysis approach on sustainability, because there's like the scenario basically where at the moment across the life cycle of an aircraft, say 80 to 90% of emissions, CO2 emissions, are during flight. But if we're really successful at decreasing those, then the biggest proportion of the emitters could end up being manufacturing, because that's next. That's probably about 10% of emissions, and MRO's 5%. So MRO being maintenance and repair and end of life. So between those things, they could end up being the biggest emitters. And the opportunity, I suppose, is that we're moving now, as they have done already in automotive, to a new generation of technology and vehicle. So how do we change to a lower carbon footprint supply chain, but also like a more resource efficient supply chain? As we do that, do we design in recyclability to the aircraft, for example? You know, polymer composites are talked about all the time in aerospace as a great technology, but they are quite difficult to recycle. So how can we make them more recyclable?
I'm going to pose that question to one of the panel in a moment, actually. It might be a better place to answer it. No, thanks, Katie. Just on a similar subject, or related subject, I'll put it to Steve, actually. What's the role of aerospace and automotive sectors are very strong, well organised in the UK and can often provide some leadership in terms of changing the manufacturing footprint. What's the role, do you think, of those sectors in driving change in the manufacturing supply chains and driving decarbonisation?
Cool, well, that's a good question. So, yes, they are both manufacturing industry sectors with a very significant history and background and a very well mature and developed supply chain. So they've got incredibly strong relationships throughout the supply chain in almost vertical silos. Now they've got an incredible amount of commercial leverage as a result of that, which is one potential factor, one lever that could be pulled. But if a business hasn't got the motivation to shift, to change its carbon footprint and its energy utilization or energy efficiency profile, it's a really difficult proposition to try and force them without some form of regulatory input from government or above. I mean, everybody would share a view that we need to be much more energy conscious and much more energy efficient, and no two ways about it. But at times when manufacturing industries have already got a monstrous investment in existing assets, resident assets, they've got to depreciate the capitalization that they've already invested in product lines that they're already producing. And so their motivation to want to shift earlier can be mitered by the fact that they've still got a huge investment to depreciate. So how you can look at sensibly repurposing elements of those to produce other alternative greener products, or look at how you can ensure that the energy consumption is reduced or the efficiency of those facilities themselves are improved such that your overall emissions footprint is improved upon. Industry, in theory, latest stats I've seen, accounts for something like 37% of the energy consumption in the UK and 24% of its CO2 emissions. So, you know, there is a very, very significant contribution to be brought to bear. And looking at the entire gambit of how you realize materials, form materials, manufacture components through products and assemblies, etc., into the marketplace, and how we can reduce the carbon footprint is really, really important. There's no two ways about it. Energy efficiency is a real big focal area. A recent study that I looked at, taking a Nissan Leaf as a topical example in the marketplace, the variant with a 39 kilowatt hour battery capacity, it takes 10 megawatt hours of energy to produce that battery. Now, that battery's got, in theory, a tangible life of about 10 years in that vehicle, depending on how it's used, its rate of charge, discharge, etc., and the condition of it. But that investment in energy to produce it seems diabolical that it would only be used once. So we've got to look at how do we manage second use, tertiary use of such investments that we've already made in energy consumption as well, I think.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Stephen. There's a question in the chat. Well, I'm going to move on, actually, but it relates to the conversation just having from Thomas again, who's channeling all our questions at the moment, around, you know, will penalties work better than incentives? But I think you've touched on the need for regulation to drive that. But what you've described there could be incentives, I think, in the way we design the products to incentivize new manufacturing solutions and materials, and thinking about second life at the design stage, perhaps, that can also, if there's new capital required, we can build that in a way that's carbon free, perhaps. But I'm going to move on and come back to the poll question that I've posed here. That it does relate to some of the discussion we've just had around, is this opportunity or threat? General support, there's been opportunity. I mean, it's a balance of both, and there's a risk and uncertainty here. But we're interested to explore where that business opportunity lies. And Vivian, you said in your introduction that you're supporting public and private sector companies, but for the private sector, that's really around answering the questions of what does net zero mean? How do businesses get involved and start to deliver net zero? So how do you answer this question to businesses? Where would you pitch the opportunity for the companies that you're speaking to in delivering net zero?
Yeah, I think the first point, I think going back to, I think it was Jin's point, that businesses like governments need a long-term vision and clarity in terms of what net zero means. And so the most important thing is to set out a scope. So a meaningful net zero target will obviously need to include scope 3, especially in the case of manufacturing sector. And following that, one thing to look at is what are the sources of emission within your value chain, and what's the timeline you're looking at. In terms of how to approach net zero, there are different pathways, and I think currently the challenge we're facing is that there hasn't been a set standard on how to achieve net zero. So, for example, the Science Based Target Initiative is drafting the first global standard for net zero targets and acceptable pathways and criteria for evaluating which kind of commitments are acceptable and aligned with the climate science. So I think with standard in place, these kind of discussions will be much easier. And I also wanted to touch on this opportunity or threat question on the panel here. I think from the type of work we've done on value retention and manufacturing, there is synergy between opportunity and emission mitigation at the same time. So we recently completed a study for remanufacturing in Canada, and the headline result was that if we were to expand remanufacturing in 6 key manufacturing sectors from the current 2% to potentially 20% by 2050, then the carbon saving is equivalent to, I think, around 13% of the manufacturing's net zero target. So there is definitely opportunities to be explored, but going back to the business model and the financing model, that have to align as well.
Yeah, but I think to get there, industry's going to need support from government, some certainty and leadership, but also from organisations like your own, like the Catapult network and the university network to guide them, it seems. I'm going to come on to the next question on the panel actually now. So we're not all answered that question, but we can weave this into the panel questions. But the next VVox question, so we can get through all these in the time. If you could pull it up, please, Callum. Another one's running in the background. So do we have the material and energy resources to deliver a net zero outcome by 2050? I think here we mean about from a UK perspective. So, and assuming Fiona talked about clean energy, renewable energy being 55% of the solution potentially, will we have a renewable energy resource that will deliver the full requirements? Do we have the material resources? Because circular economy is going to be a huge part of that, I think. So I'll leave a moment or two just for all those to come in. But I'm going to ask a question actually, Fiona. What role do you think circular economy has, related to this in delivering the net zero target?
Well, I mean, I think and this is really related to the question on the screen. We have to remember that it's not just a climate challenge, but it is very much a materials challenge. We did a piece of work that looked into if we were to replace all UK vehicles with an electric vehicle, what would the material requirement of that be? And found out that actually to do that, you'd need twice the annual world production of cobalt. You'd need 75% of the world's lithium production. You'd need, lots of other raw and very rare materials in order to do that just wouldn't be possible. And so I think when you're looking at saying, renewable energy and renewable energy technologies are the answer. Yes, from an energy perspective, but we definitely don't have the materials in order to do that. And actually, the UK particularly remains close to 100% import reliance for many of these materials, and many of them actually arrive already in components and products. So I think, you know, there's a lot of complexity around this particular question. It's not just as simple as looking at kind of the energy related resources. Materials is a key component of that picture.
Yeah, well, and also, of course, it's related to one of the questions here from Stephen. When we look at the breakdown of emissions throughout the manufacturing life cycle, just the manufacturing portion of emissions, I think we see those heavily weighted to the materials extraction and primary materials processing stages. So circular economy clearly must play a large role in addressing those. For many of the manufacturing firms we talk to, they would be seen as part of their scope 3 emissions. Supply chain, where people will be starting to look within their own factory at scope 1 and 2 emissions. How can we encourage businesses to tackle their scope 3 emissions? How can we encourage them? How do we help them?
Yeah, so, sorry, I'll come back on that, Sam, because I didn't really answer your question in its entirety about how circular economy can play a role. And I think it's really important to say that if we don't have the material requirements, then we need to start looking at our existing assets and existing materials and how we can retain the value within those materials and also recover them at end of life. And circular economy, remanufacture, processes for disassembly are going to be critical to that, and developing new skills and new technologies to enable us to do that, and making those available to businesses and helping businesses to invest in those new technologies in order to upscale those processes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Thanks, Fiona. We've got a question from Andy saying as much as 70% of overall UK economy's energy consumption comes from manufacturing. So do we see an investment in technology decreasing this, or could AI be used to help save energy in manufacturing plants by identifying energy losses? So this is certainly something around resource efficiency, be it materials or energy, in the manufacturing, in factory, if you like, and through supply chains. Vivian, if you'd like to start off with your views on this, what role is there to look at resource efficiency, energy efficiency, in the manufacturing process to start driving down that current energy consumption from manufacturing?
I think this question is also somewhat related to the scope 3 emission question, because when you look at the life cycle emission, when you look at your operational versus your value chain emissions, I think it quickly becomes clear each company or each sector have its own makeup, and you can start prioritizing on which one has the bigger size of the pie and the room for improvement as well. So being a newcomer to the manufacturing sector, I would sort of speculate that some of the manufacturing processes may already be quite efficient. So you might need to look for wins elsewhere along the supply chain, whereas there are continuous improvement opportunities in different sectors, then those are the low-hanging fruits that to be tackled, because it also makes business sense to reduce costs from those inefficiencies. So I would say that those questions will need to be looked at together.
Thank you. Thanks, Vivian. I think it's fair to say there's been a huge drive for efficiency across the manufacturing landscape over the last few decades. But that efficiency drive has been optimization for cost and quality generally, not for energy efficiency, and although there's clearly cost components of energy. So maybe a rebalancing of those optimization criteria may yield yet greater returns in terms of energy efficiency. But as you say, you touched on scope 3 emissions and that they sit within the supply chain. And I mentioned earlier that the bulk of emissions do sit at the early stage of the supply chain, the kind of materials extraction and processing. So Jen, if you'd like to talk a bit about where do you see the opportunity to address those, which for many businesses are scope 3 emissions, but reducing emissions in the early stage of the materials processing step in the supply chain?
Yes, I mean, probably I can start with the question that posed previously about the role of AI. You're absolutely right. I mean, Sam, in terms of in the past decades, we have been trying lots of efforts in optimizing the material flow, but also energy use. But don't forget, those energy probably we are targeted at the conventional energy. So if we take a forward looking in the future, the energy we're using probably will be renewable. The heating we're using will probably be renewable. So there do need a lot of new optimization schemes where AI will play an important role, because these energy sources themselves are unpredictable, and there's an intermediacy in nature, like if you're using the offshore wind as a manufacturing energy resources. So, I mean, they do need to have like AI and digital solutions to have a multi-level optimization for both energy and the materials flow. So if we use a circular economy, then it will induce additional uncertainties on the supply chain, because we're talking about the industrial symbiosis, where we probably need to take the material from other sectors. So that will induce additional uncertainty on the supply chain, where probably we take the material from the raw, like using the petrochemical resources as a supply, as a feedstock for chemical industry, for example. So there's more uncertainties in the future in order to cut for the renewables, cut for the circular economy. So we do need to develop better strategies for the optimization, where I see AI and digital solution will play a very important role.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really clear, and I would agree. There's a big opportunity and need there, because we're going to have finite resources when we've got renewable only. I'd like to come now to the next VVOX question we've got. This is a multiple choice, so you've got more than not the binary here, but we're picking out some of the things we're talking about today. Which of these present the biggest opportunities to address manufacturing emissions? So resource efficiency in factory relates to some of the things we've been talking about energy efficiency reduction in the AI. Circular economy, we've certainly touched on. Carbon capture, usage and storage, we've not touched on that, but there's certainly a key element of the industrial decarbonisation strategy that came out yesterday. And then green energy, we've said that's a huge part of 70% of emissions relate to energy directly, or energy emissions are from manufacturing. So all of those are pretty important. I'm just looking at these answers coming through. I think we're seeing a reasonable spread across all of these, and we've had certainly a bit of bias to circular economy in the discussion thus far today. So that I think rightly is an important, a crucial part of the answer. I think I'd like to come back to you, Kate, and just think about, again, from an aerospace perspective. Let's say if we are going to drive, and I've heard Chris Gear, the director of the Future Flight Programme, talk about the desire to drive down to zero the manufacturing emissions for aerospace. Where do you see the biggest opportunity here for aerospace companies, and in the industrialisation strategy you're looking at? Would you pick out any one of these areas as something you would building into the Fly Zero design and architecture in such a way that we can drive down the manufacturing emissions and footprint?
Yeah, I'm just looking at them and to try and, so my like it sort of depends, doesn't it? If you did a Pareto, and earlier you were saying that in the work that the Catapult, the high value manufacturing Catapult's doing, you see that the biggest emissions are around foundry industries, so material production. There I'd be really interested to look at whether you can either do that's a lot of heat generation, isn't it, normally? So can you do that heat generation electrically? It probably is often already, or does it always need to be combustion? And how, like, where does the fire happen? You know, because that's where the CO2 is emitted when you're burning something. Where does the fire happen along that life cycle? And if there is a fire, then there is potential for carbon capture. And so I'm really quite interested in, you know, carbon capture as well as green from source. And it's in the sense that there's quite a lot of, perhaps not carbon technologies, but other emissions scrubbing technologies that are available. And so it might be something that we can do that could make quite a big immediate impact, but is not as talked about in manufacturing industry yet as it is in power generation, you know. So yeah, I think it's something that those sectors could potentially look to.
Yeah. Great, thanks, Katie. And Steve, I'll pick out Sharon's question here as well, which kind of does relate to where these opportunities sit. So how can we make it more attractive for businesses to move faster towards net zero? And is part of that, you know, helping them to, you know, holding their hand through some of the solutions that we've outlined here?
wow. Now, how do we make it more attractive? Right. So I think at present there are certain hurdles that are inadvertently put in front of businesses that might seek to become more energy conscious and more energy efficient. The opportunity of generating energy using their own footprint, geographical footprint. There are numerous barriers preventing businesses from doing that. There is opportunity for a company to install solar PV cells on its roof and a wind turbine and things of this nature. And there have been in the past some sort of subsidies or grants to facilitate that. But one of the biggest complications is about getting a license to generate energy. And that is almost a closed shop arena at the moment. That's a real big obstruction. So any energy generation capacity they've got that they don't consume, it's really difficult to feed that back into the grid. So I think one of the barriers is about understanding how businesses can participate in the generation and distribution network for the country. The UK on average could generate all of the power it needs over a 24-hour basis, but it can't generate enough at peak times. So we end up a net importer of energy from France, as I understand it. And some of the constraints we've got are around not so much the national sort of grid, the transmission network, but the regional distribution networks, and coming up with some smart solutions such that mapping of live energy generation to live energy consumption can be done at a more regional or local level is probably one of the things that industry could start to work on for itself. But there are some of these sort of regulatory hurdles to get over, like license to generate in the first instance. So how do we motivate people? Well, ultimately, if you can get free energy, why wouldn't you want to do it? There is a business case associated with that clearly, and the uptake and adoption of renewable energy generation systems like solar PV or highly concentrated solar and wind, they will become ever more affordable with volume.
I have a question, if I can. I was just wondering, in responding to Steve's point where he was talking about using the company's own footprint, I mean, that made my brain go in two different places. The first is people are not using their offices anymore, so potentially industry will have quite a lot of land this is not used. That's the first one. The second one was around some of the more heat using industries. Again, foundry industries is a good example. Do you know if people have looked at kind of taking that thermal energy and reconverting it back into electric and then feeding that back into the grid? Because there must be some major efficiency opportunities there.
The energy vector is something that definitely needs to be considered within that. Absolutely, where we expend energy generating heat or some other energy in itself, some other form of radiation, then we should be seeking to capture that and reusing it. That's absolutely right. Harvesting is a really big opportunity from a technology perspective, and it's not that difficult to do. There are technologies around that can be used to do just that, but the integration of the systems, it needs to be planned, but it's part of a smart energy equation, and I think we've got the know-how, the wherewithal to do it. We need to mobilize to enact it.
Yeah, I think this comes back to that system level assessment. Industrial scenarios, some of the technologies are there. We need to make sure we've got the network, the infrastructure, and some of perhaps the business mechanisms, exchange mechanisms to make it work. There's got to be incentives as well. We talked a bit about regulation and the stick. There's got to be the carrot there, I think, as well, to make businesses drive the innovation from the business, from industry.
As an anecdotal example from good source, if we take the rail network in the UK as an example, the business case for electrifying the lines only works for about 50% of the total track length in the UK, because the rest of it just doesn't make practical sense on a per unit passenger basis and so forth. But anecdotally, if the rail network used all of the land that it owns and covered everything there isn't sort of live trackside area, covered it with solar PV cells. Now that's a huge number of solar PV cells, granted. they could generate enough power to power the whole network electrically. That's a big infrastructure project. It's probably unlikely to happen, but it's an example of what might be achievable.
So I mean, related to this, and there's another question from Thomas. So if you think about the opportunity for business to generate energy, but also we've got carbon capture and storage on here as a big opportunity. Well, Jenny, I'll ask you again. What's the should there be a target after net zero to take back previously emitted CO2? Should manufacturing industry be striving for net negative effectively emissions? Currently, the government commitments are not to hit zero. Yesterday's strategy are assuming that some of the offsets across the whole national system will include some emissions for manufacturing.
Yes, well, this is really rather forward-looking questions. I think we are still struggling in achieving like net in the whole net zero. So if you look at the CCC report, I think there's a clear gap on the offset capacity. I mean, within current technology, known technology, we can only cover probably like 1/3 of the offset required to balance the residue. So I think there's a need to develop new technologies to fulfill the other 2/3 of the offset, which I mean have to be the negative emission technology, which are unknown or haven't yet existed today. But if we have the capacity, I think that definitely will be scope, because the climate change is a global issue. So I mean, if we achieve net zero within the UK, I think there's a very large opportunity of space for us to be leading in globally, and there can be some exporting opportunities within the net zero area.
Great, thank you. And Fiona, what do you think? Those export opportunities could be? What's the opportunity, not just for manufacturers to decarbonise their own scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, but for companies to rise to the challenge, bringing those engineering solutions to market and potentially exporting those?
Yeah, I think there's big opportunities, particularly in the smaller business space, startups, entrepreneurs. We're seeing a lot of kind of first movers in terms of the development of new materials, new technologies, new processes and business models and ways of doing things. So, for example, company River Simple in Wales that we're working with, they're doing a fantastic job at not only applying circular economy principles to the design of their hydrogen fueled vehicles, but also expanding their leasing model across their whole supply chain. So actually they lease the car to the customer, or the customer leases the car from River Simple, but then River Simple actually leases the fuel cells from the fuel cell provider. The fuel cell provider leases the MEA cells. The MEA manufacturer actually leases the platinum from the mining company, all enabled through, or this is the vision, all enabled through blockchain technology. And I think, that in itself is a fantastic story for the UK to be, leading with a company like this, but also it completely revolutionizes the whole system. It turns really the automotive system on its head. And I know that it's only a small company, but we have to start somewhere, and demonstrators like this in the technology, in the product design, and also in the whole business model and supply chain are really inspirational, I think.
That's a great example, Fiona. I think River Simple, if no one's heard about them, go check them out. Their business model, the concept is really exciting. And as Steve mentioned earlier, there's a real challenge in terms of capitalized assets for the incumbents. Everyone's got to change, but probably the main drivers for change are going to come from some of those disruptors, I think. And the idea of designing the vehicle not for a point sales price effectively, but designing a vehicle to be optimized across its whole life cycle, including end of life, is got to be the way we go for a range of sectors and assets. I think really exciting. I'm going to pull up now the last set of questions. We are going to finish on time in about 6 minutes. So the last set of VBOX questions. So this relates to the industrial decarbonisation policy that came out yesterday. These are some of the headline sort of interventions and recommendations from government. And the question we're asking here is which of these measures published in yesterday's strategy would you expect to have the greatest impact So carbon pricing, standards to evidence carbon content of products. So that would create a differential opportunity for those that for developing low carbon products, low carbon supply chains. Government procurement through green industrial programs, and addressing carbon leakage. So carbon leakage is about leakage off our shores, if you like. So one way of addressing net zero for manufacturing would be, of course, to not manufacture in the UK if you're only counting with territorial emissions versus consumption emissions, which relates to all the products consumed in the UK. So leakage would be leakage of carbon that's consumed in the UK into emissions overseas, which is a risk for manufacturing and probably requires some policy interventions or green standards and norms to avoid leakage and encourage maybe the opposite in terms of investment into green supply chains in the UK. So I'll let that run for a minute or two longer before we answer all of those. But yeah, on a later note, I'm going to come to Vivian next. And in your discussions with government, and obviously we've got Steve here from BEIS as well, and have you come back to his question, which we touched on earlier around Scope 3 emissions. But in your discussion with government and industry, what do you see the role of standards playing here? There are standards out there, but standards, or at least industrial adopted norms across sectors, across industry, in driving us towards net zero. How important is that, and what do you think needs to be done?
Yeah, I think when looking at standards, we're looking at potentially different dimensions or different aspects of standards, right? Previously, we talked about standards for net zero, the definition of it, standards for the pathways to net zero, which ones are aligned with climate science and which ones are not. Now here we're looking at standards for products. I think with the development of extended producer responsibility policies, there is increasing sort of ambition to encourage low carbon content products or have some sort of eco-design benefits factored in. So now then the question is, what constitutes eco-design in different sectors? We work quite a lot with, for example, the furniture and mattress bulky waste sector. And you can, once you scratch beneath the surface of what is an eco-design product and the trade-offs, and gets quite complicated. So I would say on this topic specifically, how to define eco-design and the carbon content for different products, what criteria to use would be quite crucial.
Yeah, great, thank you. I'm going to come back to Steve actually with a question we've had from Dan, asking how do we encourage whole life cycle carbon reduction rather than just point of consumption? So an example here, which I know is close to your heart, Steve, looking at high energy consumption in the production of batteries using rare materials. So how do we drive that whole life cycle reduction, which does again touch on this Scope 3 emissions reduction challenge?
Yes, thank you. That's an interesting, an even more interesting question. The top item there, carbon pricing. There may be a degree of latitude in interpretation, but a really strong example, as Katie mentioned earlier, is emissions regulations that have come to bear in wheeled transport sectors, not just automotive, but heavy goods vehicles et al. Once you put in place a fiscal penalty for transgressing such thresholds, such boundaries, the industry becomes really motivated to find solutions. Now, that's not to say that the only route to achieving these things is by command and control measures or with a very large stick to beat industries with. But it does have a very significant motivational factor. If an industry enterprise is no longer able to operate within its specific sector or tier of the supply chain because of its inability to comply with requirements, such as whole life emissions or embedded carbon footprint, then they will need to find solutions. Or, dare I say it, there is a risk that they're no longer part of the ecosystem as far as industry goes in the future. Now, that might not be a palatable answer to a good number of people, and I can wholly understand and appreciate that. But the mere fact and reality is that if we don't start to make sort of whole raft changes of that nature, then we won't start to achieve the targets that are set for us long term. So we've got to appreciate that there is a cliff edge ahead of us at some point in the future, and we might have absolute crystal clarity of where that cliff edge is, like automotive has in the future. Others have got high levels of fog between themselves and that cliff edge, and it may come as a surprise, but we've got to anticipate it. We've got to start planning for it if we're not already active in seeking to address it. So some of the commentary around materials use, materials type and utilization, and therefore the sources for it, so that you look at the geographical footprint of the materials supply chain and seek to use material solutions that are nearer by, even though they may not be the optimum material. Cobalt's a really good example. It's quite a nasty material to actually harvest, as it were, to source out of the ground, and not in plentiful supply. But its real use is only to act as a dosing agent to enable manufacturability of components. It doesn't serve any functional use. So we've got to ask ourselves the question, why the hell do we use it at all? You know, it's things like that that we need to start countering and come up with alternative solutions for.
Thank you, Steve. No, it's really good points. I think there's a sense then that manufacturers need to be responsible for the full life cycle, the end of life, and the design stage, as well as the manufacturing footprint. Well, we're out of time. I'm afraid I feel like I could have gone on for quite a while there. And I see as an audience you've stuck with us, so thank you. Hopefully you felt the same. Some great discussions there. And we'll try and capture and pull some of those together and share them, certainly in summary. Really enjoyed it. Thank you very much to all our panelists and to the audience and for your questions. I'm sorry we didn't have more time. I think we could have gone for another hour, but we'll wrap it up there and hand back to Aaron and to Chris. Thanks, folks.
Thank you, Sam, and thanks to our panelists. We really appreciate your input on such a relevant topic. It's really thoroughly interesting. We're now going to wrap up, and at this point, I'd like to welcome back Sam Turner, and joining him, Chris Dunkley, Director of Impact and Insight at the MTC. Hi. Following the 4 panels today covering technology, skills, supply chains, and our drive towards net zero, I want to get a few immediate reflections from Sam and Chris, who have helped coordinate some of the ITC sessions. Chris, I know you've been listening to the panel throughout the day. What were the messages you took from them?
Well, there's been some great interactions, insights from different perspectives, and also some practical advice on how to engage with the support that's available. So there's lots to cover. I've got a few notes here which the team have helped me put together, so I'll talk quickly so we can get through them. I'll let Sam think about the output from Net Zero one. So in the first session we had this morning was around the adoption of technology and innovation, run by Barry and Mike from the MTC. Key summary of that was automation, widely seen as people replacer instead of people augmenter, and there clearly is some messages around that. Adoption is not immediate, it is part of a journey, and you need to take people on that journey. And coupled with that, there is a fear of investment in automation and new technology, and we need to get around that as well. Many people think that machines will replace workers, but we had examples from Jason from Aerosmith around creation of hundreds of jobs as a result of it. And in terms of, we had a poll on that one in terms of barriers to adoption, and the 4 key areas were skills, making sure people have the skills, the complexity, the fear, and the risk. So there was a few bits of advice given in terms of start with small steps, look for independent advice, humanize the process, make the team part of that process, network broadly, get to know the people and who's out there who can help. And also actually SMEs can be the inspiration for adoption into the OEMs. And there's an example from Unilever from that point of view. And then the second session we had today was around supply chain resilience, and that was hosted by Steve Smith. And there was a number of key messages coming around that. So in the supply chain, we need to be needs to be ready for changes in technology as and when they come. Businesses do need to move away from cost reduction and supply chain models and the key to resilience, and this is something which came up in day one of the conference, is about agility. So being highly reactive is not necessarily being agile. We need to be able to repurpose assets and move skills from one place to another. And then the session before, Sam's around the SME and skills. We talked about lifelong learning, and businesses need to embed that. We actually, interesting topic was around the use of experienced and mature workers, sometimes an often neglected area. And there could be some generational differences in the willingness to learn about new technology, but we want to make sure that we're involving everyone within our workforce. And that thirst for knowledge has got to be embedded in the culture of the business, so people want to actually move forward. We talked about recruiting and the type of people we want. So we want skilled people, but we also want people with the right attitude and being open to changes. We talked about apprenticeships and the advantages of those. So the loyalty, grassroots recruitment, business has more control in how the apprentices learn. We talked about the company and their attitudes to workforce, and just worth celebrating what's happened in the last 12 months. So there's been plenty of examples across the National Manufacturing Summit around breweries producing hand sanitizer. The ventilator challenge obviously is a key one that we've been involved in, and also more need to understand the softer skills and behavioural skills for actually when engineers are actually moving into management positions. So I've rattled through that, but there was a huge amount to cover.
Thanks, Chris. If I can turn to you, Sam, the drive to net zero is without doubt the single biggest challenge of our times, an almost impossible task. But what were the thoughts from you?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. First of all, I'd like to say well done, Chris. That's a phenomenal summary of all those sessions.
Those notes came from my team then.
Trying to summarise the net zero one alone in a couple of minutes is a challenge. And one thing that struck me actually as Chris was talking is that the interconnectedness of these different themes, that they don't stand alone. And in looking at the net zero challenge, certainly resilience, energy resilience, but manufacturing supply chain resilience, making sure we don't inadvertently offshore our manufacturing footprint as a way of decarbonising, having the right sort of levers in place, certainly came through strongly. And digitalisation will be a big part of it. We talked about AI as a way of kind of balancing systems, but also optimising, optimising for energy efficiency and resource efficiency at various steps in the manufacturing life cycle. So we talked about whether net zero provide an opportunity or threat for businesses. I think the optimistic view was broadly that there's an opportunity here, but there certainly seems to be uncertainty for businesses on where to start, what it really means. And we talked about the role for government to play. So there's a real need, we felt, for leadership and a bit of certainty. And we had the industrial decarbonisation strategy that came out yesterday, which helps laying out a roadmap there. And we talked about the need for a system level approach. So solving one part of the problem may actually create more of a problem elsewhere. And certainly we've got to look at things like, for the circular economy, things like industrial symbiosis. We're going to have to look at system level approaches and need some metrics in place that enable the market to kind of come together around resolving these challenges. So we'll need, things like maybe carbon pricing, some of the carrot and the stick that needs to be there to incentivize businesses, and also challenge businesses to look at their scope 3 emissions throughout supply chains. So for the OEMs and tier 1s, looking at supply chain emissions, and also for mid-tier companies, I think being incentivized to perhaps win business on not only cost and quality and responsiveness, but also on their sustainable footprints and performance. So standards are a really important part of that, evidencing people's performance and helping businesses win business. So to provide that carrot opportunity. We talked about circular economy and materials being a huge part of this. A lot of the industrial emissions, when we look at manufacturing emissions, actually lie at the early stage of the manufacturing life cycle. And we talked about a range of numbers of how big is the manufacturing emissions problem, between 16%, which is the lower number you'll see of the manufacturing SITCOs, 24%, where we look at some of the related things around transport and energy, and up to about 40% if you think about consumption emissions. But manufacturing counts for a big part of industrial emissions as a whole. And the bulk of those actually lie in the early stages. So optimizing, assembly factories is going to have an impact. Looking at the material extraction, recycling, circular economy, and materials processing is where we're going to see the biggest opportunity to reduce emissions and get to net zero. So lots of great ideas and conversation. Probably had a chat for an hour with any one of the panelists, never mind everybody together. It was a really rich discussion. So some great insights and opportunities there, I think.
And Sam, in your role at HVM Catapult, where do we need to go next on our transformational manufacturing journey?
Yeah, good question. Something we're putting a lot of thought into, as you might expect right now. It's a central part of our strategy. So, and we welcomed the industrial decarbonisation strategy out yesterday. We're looking at kind of couching our ambitions in there and how do we support government and industry in delivering this target, because the system level view is essential, and that's something we recognise. So I think as part of that, we're looking at ways of addressing these scope 3 emissions and making sure we don't have carbon leakage, so we don't end up offshoring our manufacturing footprint, incidentally, because of the cost penalties and innovation to get to zero carbon, and actually make that a market winning opportunity. So part of that is working with business, government and standards organisations to get sensible sets of standards that work for businesses, that will drive incentives for businesses to decarbonise and win business and realise their opportunity. So accounting and tracking methods for tracking carbon through real supply chains and accounting for that in a way that becomes an industry norm, maybe working with sector leads to achieve that is going to be crucial. And then looking at where are the interventions to reduce emissions at various steps in the manufacturing life cycle. We talked about circular economy just now as being a big part of that, because that's been a huge element. Looking at designing for through life emissions, looking at new business models. We talked about the example of River Simple in our workshop just now. So, business models, material efficiency, looking at next generation materials for the low emissions in the processing, but can be reused at end of life, and looking at resource efficiency through the manufacturing life cycle as well. So optimizing for reduction of energy usage and materials usage. So really we're looking at guidelines for at a government and sector level to make the standards and make the system work, looking at the interventions that we can help companies to go and make to realise the opportunity and decarbonise. And we're also looking at how we might develop almost a how-to, guidebooks for companies at different steps in that life cycle, whether we're an OEM manufacturer, make-to-print manufacturer, so we can guide businesses on who want to start on that journey.
Right, it's quite a lot to take in, really. Any final thoughts, Chris, on the ITC and what next?
No, I'd just like to thank everyone who's brought the Industrial Transformation Conference to life as part of the National Manufacturing Summit programme. My team, and in particular AJ, who actually put these notes together, so thank you for that, AJ. The events team, who actually have been working under really quite extraordinary circumstances. I know we seem to have got used to it, but it's still very, very odd. Our speakers and our panelists, and also our audience for their challenging questions as we've gone through. We'll be reaching out in the coming months to create working groups around the 3 challenge-led workshops around space, agri-food and construction. And as Clive Hickman declared yesterday, the National Manufacturing Summit will be returning in 2022, and I hope that most of us will be sat in the same room so we can carry on our debate on the challenges, and more importantly, collaborate around some of those biggest manufacturing issues of our times. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Sam. So that's it. Recordings of all the sessions will be available to view again after the event. If you're interested in signing up for one of the challenge-led working groups, then you can do so by using the survey link attached to the chat, and we look forward to seeing you in person very soon. Goodbye.